News of Omicron have rattled global markets, and while most have regained some ground, there is still much uncertainty as the world awaits concrete data about the threat posed by this new variant. For more, I have Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. It's a pleasure to have you back, Professor Song.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I also have Professor Che Sang-mi from Ewha Women's University. Welcome back, Professor Che.
Thank you for having me.
I'll start with you, Professor Song. The central bank has forecast a 4% economic expansion for Korea for this year. How does the emergence of Omicron look to affect the local economy?
Yeah, so far as I'm concerned, that this outlook made by the Central Bank of Korea is made before the outbreak of Omicron has been known to us. So at least because we have just a very short, just 1 month for the end of the this year. So actually, the 4% growth rate will be accomplished, most likely to be. But clearly, it could have some negative impact on the international trade and therefore the export and import. Of course, we might have some positive effect on some commodity price, such as oil price, will be dropped. But however, the disruption of international trade could be extended further. For the domestic economy, actually the government they decided to maintain the current situation and not to the lockdown of the economy is beyond the option. So all I can say is just wait and see. But I just hope the further disruption not to be extended, not to that too severe to disrupt the economy.
Right, and I'm sure that hope is being shared by the international community. Professor Che, as I mentioned earlier, US and European stock markets lost ground Friday following news of Omicron. Now, they've regained ground since then, but what are your prospects for the international stock market in the near future amid the presence of Omicron?
The price action, like a sharp drop down the last week, is like the make sense situation for a circumstance that we don't know about the Omicron virus. It's how it's going to evolve, and then also it gives a lot of uncertainty on a stock market as well as a financial market, global financial market. If you look at the December itself, generally it's like a very good month for the equity. US equity, especially because the corporates actually buybacks is accelerating to end of the year. So that there are lots of reasons. That's a reason that we think it's going to be bullish market in the December. However, I'm sure that the virus itself adds a certain layer of uncertainty itself. So I think maybe that the US dollar going to be higher position, as well as we'll see the lot of uncertainty and volatility in interest market.
Right.
So, yeah.
And meanwhile, on the local stock market, Professor Song, what are your prospects for our bourse in the future amid Omicron?
It totally depends upon whether the spread of the Omicron would be such a powerful and severe, so that determines the future prospect of the stock market. But currently, the 2,800 points is most unlikely to take place because the stock market is always subject to large volatility, and it should not be used as some leading indicator to make a forecast about the future. But anyway, clearly the international market and volatility is increased because of the uncertainty. So as long as as far as I'm concerned, Dr. Fauci has been they must determine whether the Omicron is how powerful it would be, and then whether the vaccine turns out to be successfully effective to prevent them spreading, and the medicines that take care of the coronavirus. Then totally it depends on that situation. So as long as it turns out to be the vaccine and medicine will be effective, then this disruption just end up with just a temporary.
Right. Professor Che, what are your personal thoughts then on Omicron further disrupting supply chains and perhaps raising inflationary pressure?
To expect about the supply chain disruption itself, we have to understand why we experience that supply disruption these days. I can say there are three reasons. The first, there are lack of international shipping due to we have a little number of vessels there, and the plus the lack of labor in the labor market due to because people avoid to work in person work in the person in the workplace. They don't want to have a job because of the contamination itself. And then third, there are certain bounce back of demand itself. So if you look at the three reasons, recently in a short-term perspective, the supply disruption can be severe because no labor in the labor market, and then the increasing demands cannot be decreased in short time. So still we lack of the limited international shipping. So based on these facts, we can expect that the inflation gotta be severe in a short-term perspective. However, if you look at the long term, then demands can be decreased due to people don't have expandable income because they don't have a job. Also, because of lack of demands, that the buyer firms, manufacturer, they have to reduce the number of production, so it can be ease that disruptions a little bit.
Right, I see. And Professor Song, you mentioned this earlier, but oil prices have also plunged amid news of Omicron. Can we expect an ease then in inflationary pressure given this fall in energy prices?
Yeah, according to the report, the Western Texas Intermediate future price. So future price is the oil price that will be delivered in the future. So that has been plunged. It has reached $85 per barrel, and now it has reached $69. So there is when we look back when the coronavirus has break out, then it has plunged very sharply. Therefore, currently the inflation pressure because of the oil price could be eased and the burden is relieved. And then already OPEC plus member countries, they have decided to control and adjust the oil supply. Therefore, in the short run, even Professor Che has mentioned that the inflation could surge, but at least for for South Korea, because we depend too much on some oil price, and the recent inflation in Korea has been driven by the oil price and commodity price. So I anticipate the inflation pressure will be relieved.
Right. And what then, perhaps, Professor Song, what would be the variables that could work or serve to push up oil prices back up?
That could be as long as that depends on the worldwide economic situation. So if the supply chain disruption has been resolved, and then effectively we can take care of the Omicron virus variant, and then the world international trade has been back on the track to recovery, and then we may have some inflation. It may continue, but it will be stabilized over the 2% or something, because that is the goal by the U.S. and some other countries. So so far the prospect is not that bad.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking about the U.S., Professor Che, how does Omicron look to affect or impact U.S. Federal Reserve's tapering of its asset purchases?
Actually, the variant itself can slow down the progress of economy, right? And then employment itself. So that, as you can see, the Powell's statements about that Omicron itself, he shows great concern about the virus, and expects that because of that virus spread out, people that are not willing to go back to the workplace in person, and then that the supply disruption can be more severe, which makes that market there are more harden that inflation itself. So that the U.S. Fed will use more tools to control that economy and that boost the labor market, as well as to control that inflation itself. So based on that, a lot of economists said that last weekend, the Fed will not go faster on tapering itself, only in December.
Right.
Yeah.
And Professor Song, prior to news about Omicron, of course, the central bank here has been quick to raise its key interest rate as part of efforts to rein in inflationary pressure and, of course, household debt. How do you explain this monetary tightening and the potential impact of this action on the economy here?
Yeah, coupled with the outbreak of the Omicron variant, that would be at least must be some negative story. And I'm concerned about whether, coupled with the spread of the Omicron virus, that could have some very negative impact on the consumption and demand. Therefore, the economy might be become very slow to the recovery. So, I would like to advise the Bank of Korea that not to raise the interest rate for the next meeting in January and February. They have to wait until how is the phase of Omicron has been realized in the future. So that would be a much better option.
To take a wait-and-see approach.
Right, yeah.
And staying with the BOK, Professor Che, what do you believe are the chances then of a further hike in the benchmark interest rate amid the presence of Omicron?
Actually, that Omicron variant is going severe, then we'll experience decreasing demands and, severe unemployment rate as well. So we cannot expect that the progress of the Korean economy next year, so that that Bank of Korea will see the balance between how we can control the inflation as well as bounce back that demand itself. So the BOK will look at the Fed's decision, of course, right? So if they decides that not to go faster to increasing their interest rate, then Korean government as well, Bank of Korea will adjust the speed of controlling that inflation so that they are not to increase the interest rate quickly.
Right. And Professor Song, recently Samsung Electronics spoke about building a $17 billion foundry in Taylor, Texas. What are your prospects on the global semiconductor foundry market?
Yeah, because the demand for the semiconductor is increased, and because of the IoT and artificial intelligence and also several aspects of a systemic semiconductor is clearly the demand is increased. But however, in light of the foundry, the political tension between China and Taiwan turns out to be a threat because TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, has supplied almost 50% of the semiconductor. So that turns out could be a really threat. That's why the Intel has decided to build up foundry within US or other places. So far as I'm concerned, Samsung's choice in Taylor City in building a foundry, that is clearly it helps the US economy profit. And also to that regard, currently the semiconductor demand will be expected to increase, but still the Samsung's strategy is to focus, they just try to shift their focus on some foundry to fabless. Fabless is about the design of the semiconductor. Foundry is just printing out manufacturing. So value added is much more bigger in the fabless. So I think the Samsung's strategy, and recently I have heard the vice chairman of Samsung Electronics, Lee Jae-young's remark about the crisis.
You're talking about the harsh market reality, right?
Actually, because of the Intel and just the foundry itself is not enough to keep the competitiveness within the semiconductor industry, even though Samsung and TSMC is the only two firms which can produce a 7 nanometer semiconductor, and they try to improve 3 nanometer semiconductor line, which could be make it semiconductor very small, and even it could have a much more versatile usage over the products. But what I'm concerned is fabless is much more important. So, of course, now we realize that the supply chain disruption could have a same negative impact on the economy. So that's why Vice Chairman Lee has mentioned that harsh market situation and the competition will be intensified. So that is what I understand his remarks.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Che, quite a number of economic indices are poised to be shared next month. That would be December, which starts tomorrow, by the way. Which ones do you believe will offer us a better understanding about our economic stability amid the pandemic?
Yeah, as you know, there are lots of economic indices shows or expect next year. But if we refer that U.S. government's position, they value a lot about employment rates, right? So because in December, if they see that no changeable employment rate, that which means that the Omicron virus is not that negative impact on our market, so they still see, the progress of economy next year. So we have to look at that employment rate indices. And if you look at the Korean forecasting and indices, we see the very rosy things for next year compared to last 2 years, because we experienced very severe pandemic and recession. So if the virus itself, we don't have clear information. We have clear information about the virus, how it's going on, or given negative impact on market. But if shows a very good indices such as the unemployment rate, then employment rate as well, then we have to be ready for some kind of inflation coming up next year.
If demand goes up, of course. Professor, so I understand this might be a difficult question, but do you see the world ushering in the year 2022 on a firmer footing on the economic front, as hoped for by experts like yourself? Do you believe we'll start on a rosy outlook?
It's really difficult
I know,
question,
given
but
the presence of Omicron.
hopefully, because of we found some very good vaccine, and also the current vaccine turns out to be as effective to control the disease and the mutation of the Omicron and the next mutation. Still, we have to live with those mutation coronavirus variant, and then as far as some medicine is developed, and then we can live with coronavirus, not anymore. People and the small enterprise and the self-employed people they don't have to lay off, and they may not suffer from the shortage of the supply of labor, as Professor Chai mentioned. So if that is most very good scenario, and then I hope in the year of 2022 the inflation will be stabilized, and hopefully the economy will be on the track to recovery. So.
Right. And staying with the optimism, Professor Che, this is something that you mentioned earlier, which is something Professor Sung also just touched upon. What is your outlook with regard to the job market? Because as you mentioned, a rather unsettling phenomenon is taking place in the labor market. Given the shortage of workers in labor-intensive sectors as well as that of hospitality, do you expect this to continue, or will there be an improvement?
I mean, in Korean market?
In the Korean market for next year?
Next year, Korean market compared to U.S. market, we don't have enough job. I think still the younger generation, they are experience lack of the job they're going to have. But if you look at the production and manufacturing sector, they are still looking for that preferred employee. So there is some kind of mismatching is going on. But if the global economy is going to be good condition, then also we expect that the job market going to be improved as well, especially in the service sector and tour sector as well. Yeah.
All right, so we can keep our fingers crossed then.
Yeah, of course.
All right, Professor Che, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Song, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.